Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Samir Handuja, who's going to be talking with you about cyberbullying, AI, and social media, the role of parents, youth, and the community. Welcome, Samir Handuja.
Thank you so much, Charlene, and also thank you, Bev and Cynthia, for helping with this. So glad to be here. I have a longstanding relationship with the Parent Venture, and I appreciate the attendance of those who are with us tonight. I want to also say that when it comes to all that I'm going to cover, we will make sure that we can get you slides if you'd like, and Charlene also mentioned the video recording. Additionally, we have many other resources, and so as parents, as guardians, oftentimes we feel overwhelmed, we feel nervous, we feel stressed out because we just don't know how best to serve our children, serve our teenagers when it comes to technology, social media, gaming, live streaming, some of these other topics. But please know there is help to be had. Just ask, and we'll make sure that we get you what you need. I take great pride in getting back to everyone who reaches out to me, and that will continue. So don't hesitate. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So when I decided to work on this presentation, I thought about what I covered last March, and I wanted to make sure that I had brand new content for you. And the cool thing is that we collected new data last year in the middle of last year, and so I haven't shared that yet with you. Additionally, there's been some new ways that we're trying to reach youth when it comes to talking points and just strategies, which we'll also cover. And then, without a doubt, generative AI has exploded in terms of popularity and use. So I want to give you some data related to that, and then talk about how I'd like you to be involved, if at all possible, with your children as it continues to gain more and more ubiquitous across our nation and world. So we'll dive right in. First off, last May, y'all will recall that our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, put out an advisory related to social media and youth. Now, the crux of that advisory focused on mental health and just said that, look, we need to be thinking more and more about their well-being, and we need to be thinking more and more about safety. That makes sense, and that's something that is intuitive to you and I, but I think it was wonderful for a government official in a prominent position to bring this to the forefront of every stakeholder. Now, the media tended to run with the headlines that focused on the negatives, and he did point out some negatives without a doubt. But in that same social media advisory, he also pointed out some of the positives. And so just a reminder to all of us that when we approach these technological developments with a negative tone, with negative body language, and with a lot of criticism and judgment, many times our youth are not going to be willing to open up to us. And what do we need? We need that open line of communication so that ideally they're benefiting, but when they're struggling or when they are dealing with some sort of unpleasant or distressing situation, they come to us. Again, ideally they're thriving and they're using the technology to level up and to prepare themselves for professional and personal success. But when they face adversity online, social or relational, we want them to come to us because we're in the best positions to assist them. But they need to know that we're not going to criticize or judge them. So again, I'm thankful for this advisory. And we saw yesterday in the testimonies, if you were able to perhaps watch some of them or at least read some sort of summary of what unfolded, there's a lot of back and forth. And it was very heated and very emotional, which makes sense because we're dealing with the lives of kids. You know, I'm a parent and you're a parent, and we, of course, care deeply about doing all that we can to safeguard and support them in any environment, offline as well as online. I was pleased to see that many of the social media representatives acknowledged that, harm has happened and that they could do more and they want to do more, and they're going to continue to try to do more when it comes to throwing resources at various sorts of trust and safety initiatives. I need to see that, and we need more accountability. I've written multiple pieces, which I'll try to share with you in the chat a little bit later, related to the role of social media legislation and governance and accountability and what needs to take place. And so you can look over that at your leisure, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you. But while that's in progress, all I think to myself is I have to do what I can do, which is, okay, what am I in control of? I'm in control, so to speak, of my family, and I need to lead them properly, and I need to be involved. All of you are being involved by being part of this specific session, and so I appreciate that. And as I mentioned, I am now a friend to you. And so I will come through as best as I can moving forward if you ever deal with any sort of issues or incidents next week, next month, next year. So we like to think about all these platforms, and I like to remind everyone that the vast majority of youth use their favorite social media apps and games and consoles in a responsible way. They of course go online and they have a lot of fun, and maybe that fun doesn't make any sense to you, and maybe you even think it's a bit of a waste of time, but they're enjoying it. And not only is it meeting their entertainment needs, but their communication needs and their social needs, and even sometimes their academic needs, their scholastic needs, which is what I want to see. I want to make sure my kids are embracing, for example, Roblox and learning with various of the games that have been created by many other users across the planet. So there are benefits, and so we should always be considering them. Additionally, related to identity formation and exploration, critical thinking, there's so much, and all of this, I'll say, is critically important as we move deeper and deeper into an information-based society and economy. So you all know that one of my wheelhouses is cyberbullying, and it's important to point out that the aggressor tends to be someone from school. It isn't typically stranger danger. And I think that's important because that means that schools have a role to play, and I work with a number of schools across the nation. And of course, parents and guardians have a role to play. The community has a role to play as well, and we'll get into that a little bit. Here's the new data that I alluded to earlier. So as a reference point, and again, it's important for us to have a numeric picture, an empirical picture of what's going on, rather than just look at this headline or that headline and think that that's the norm. So let's summarize this briefly. The left side of the chart shows that across 13 to 17-year-olds in America, about 1 out of 3 have been bullied at school in the last month. 3 out of 4 will tell you they've been bullied at school at some point in their lifetime: elementary, middle, high school, upper school. On the right side of the chart, we see that about 1 out of 2 will tell you that they've been bullied online in the last month, and a little bit over 1 out of 2 have been bullied online in their lifetime. So thinking about trends, we're seeing that there's a bit of an uptick. This is going up. I won't say drastically, but a few percentage points every time we study it. Let me share with you a couple of forms of online harassment and harm which popped to me, which made me think, dear heavens, I need to look into that a little bit more, and I need to make sure that youth-serving adults have it on their radar. Again, we'll get you these slides, we'll give you this information so that you can carefully look through each type of harm that's listed here, but here are a few that really popped to me. One is posted mean names or comments about me with a sexual meaning. So that makes me think about what sort of sexual harassment is taking place between 13 and 17-year-olds. And how severe is it? What does it look like? Are the victims feeling like this is something that's repetitive and inescapable? Are they able to deflect or distract or somehow cope with it in a healthy way? Or is it leading to trauma, which we'll also discuss? Posted mean names or comments about my race or color, 14%. And posted mean names or comments about my religion, 8.8%. And I know that Charlene's going to talk about the work of Dasha Slater a little bit later, just illustrating how powerful it is in a negative way when we see individuals banter with race-based or religious-based hurtful words. It crosses a line, and then it causes all sorts of problems, not only to that target, to that victim, but to the community, the students, the student body, and the community. I also want to point out a few other things that popped. One is someone repeatedly contacted me via text or online, over 1 out of 5. Someone stalked me online, 14%. Someone tracked me or monitored my location or activities after I told them to stop. You and I would never want a 13 or 14 or 15 or 16 or 17-year-old dealing with this sort of stuff. This invasion of privacy, this constant tracking or monitoring. But this is what we're seeing, aided and abetted by technology. So this reminds me that it's important to have conversations with our youth about, hey, your friendships, your relationships, what's going on there? Are they built on a foundation of trust, or is there invasions of privacy taking place? Is there tracking and stalking, whatever that looks like? I know we joke about you have a crush and you scope them out online and you stalk them, and we sort of trivialize that, but I don't have a piece about that. I think that's very controlling behavior. I think that if it's meant to work out with this crush that's going to work out without you, again, stalking them online to learn so much about them. So the concern might not be that specific behavior, but where it leads to, because if we trivialize that, what more becomes acceptable and acceptable? Who do you tell? Thankfully, 7 out of 10 talk to a parent, but you and I wish that would be higher. And unfortunately, and this is very disappointing for me, we see year after year after year in the middle of this chart that they are not willing to talk to educators, whether it's a school counselor, a teacher, principal or assistant principal, or somebody else at school. Schools are racking their brains to figure out solutions, to figure out what it'll take to help youth become a little bit more open and candid with their experiences. Because when I go to schools and I speak to the youth, I tell them, look, we cannot read your minds. We want to come through for you. We're in a position to help you as educators. But if you never give us a chance, what are we supposed to do? And I know you're nervous about us making it a big deal, you being targeted for additional retaliation, but you've got to trust that we believe that we have to give you a great experience when you muster up enough courage to come to us, because if you have a bad experience, you're going to tell everyone, never go to Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. And we don't want that, because then the entire student body will never talk to us. And the school climate will be in the pits. It'll be awful. How did you respond? Thankfully, 7 out of 10 are blocking, but that should be closer to 100%. One of my big focal areas has to do with resilience. And a resilient response is remembering that you have agency and you have autonomy to control your online experience. And so we want all of them to take the app or the game and look into the settings and very quickly figure out how they can block or mute or report, of course, someone else who's being problematic. But here we see only 31%, the third bar from the left, report the problematic behavior to the site or the app. The platforms, and this again comes up in the testimonies yesterday and then just in general, the platforms are not going to proactively be able to police, for example, on Facebook, 3.1 billion accounts. I know youth are not using Facebook, but just go with me. Well, 1.2 billion Instagram accounts. They're not going to be able to proactively police 100 or 500 million Snapchat accounts. So when we let them know about an issue, then they will ideally respond, and hopefully quicker. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, you know that if it takes any of you more than 24 to 48 hours to get a response from a social media company when your child or teenager is being targeted or humiliated or threatened or otherwise victimized, please reach out to me and I will personally work with you if you give me the digital evidence, which I'll talk about later, to make the problem go away, which is what our youth want. But please encourage your children to take the time to report it to the site or the app. It's all behind the scenes. They don't get outed. The app or the game will look into it and they will sanction the account or the user or both. And then as I think more and more about youth and adolescent development, you and I both remember how difficult it was when we had a relatively small problem, such as a pimple on our nose. I'll speak from my personal experience. Man, it felt like the end of the world. And I would just descend into this gigantic cloud of sadness and frustration and misery. It would take over and it would color and condition everything that I did, my attitude, how I interacted with my parents, whether I was able to focus on my schoolwork. A pimple on my nose. So when you think about cyberbullying, which is much more severe, you can imagine our youth are dealing with heavy doses of anger and frustration and fear and embarrassment and sadness. And many times they have not yet developed the coping skills to quickly extricate themselves or bracket that emotion to then logically and rationally keep going. So they end up acting out when it comes to interpersonal harm, when it comes to aggression, when it comes to self-harm, which is, of course, something that we care deeply about. We've got to help them think through and talk through the emotions, because if they're not able to articulate it, as a colleague, Dr. Dan Siegel says, if they're not able to name it, then they're not able to tame it. So if at all possible, when your kids are struggling with any form of adversity, whether it's online or offline, try to get them as best as you can to talk about how they're feeling, to wrap words around it. That goes a long continue to study these forms of harassment through the lens of trauma, you can see that the data bears out that this is a significant issue. 1 out of 4 have had strong physical reactions when someone reminded them of being cyberbullied. 1 out of 4 have lost interest in activities they loved. And of course, it's affected their schoolwork and 1 out of 5 say they've had repeated, disturbing, and unwanted memories. So there's been an incipient amount of research related to PTSD and cyberbullying, PTSD and bullying. That's going to continue, unfortunately. And so we have to continue to come alongside our youth and realize that we can't just tell them, put down your phone, delete the app, stop spending so much time on your device, and you won't be struggling so much. It trivializes it, and it comes across as callous, and it's not helpful. A couple other points related to data, then we'll get into more of the prevention and response matters. 20% have skipped school because of cyberbullying. Again, this is a national sample of youth across our nation last year. And over half, 51%, when they were cyberbullied, it deeply affected their ability to learn and feel safe. So if you're having trouble getting your school to devote resources to this problem, point out that it's compromising students' ability to learn, academic achievement, and then feelings of safety, perceptions of safety. Interestingly, without being bullied or cyberbullied, about 9 out of 10 youth feel safe at school. But if you're being bullied at school, it drops down to 83%. And if you're being cyberbullied at school, it drops down to about 3 out of 4 youth. So here again, we've got evidence that it deeply compromises youth well-being and feelings of safety at school. Okay, so let's talk about strategies. In the previous talk with Parent Venture, I focused a lot on resilience, how we can build resilience amongst our youth in specific, actionable ways. I've written about that. I've keynoted about that. And then also when it comes to empathy, I focused a lot on empathy. How can we cultivate empathy, a softer heart? Because that makes a great deal of difference when we're thinking about these forms of peer aggression. I will not speak about those today, but I'm happy to follow up with each and every one of you if you would like specific strategies related to building empathy and building resilience, including resources, including specific solutions towards that end. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. But I wanted to take a different approach today. First off, when I'm working with youth, whether it's my own children or at school, one of the things I like to do is called worst case scenario. So when you're a teenager and you're being harassed and rumors are spreading across the student body about you, it does feel like the walls are closing in and it does feel like your life is going to end. But what's useful is having that conversation about, okay, let's articulate, let's verbalize what is the worst case scenario here. And so helping them take it to that logic, to that perhaps even illogical extreme, really helps them to realize that the chances of that happening, for example, a rumor leading to them being the talk of the school for the entire school year, or them constantly having to deal with, this form of victimization or that form of victimization, typically it doesn't last. And typically there's other things to focus in on because in general, we can't really control what the student body is saying. They're always going to chirp and there is always going to be someone that they're focusing in on. So we can only control what we can control, which I'll get to in a second. But again, helping our youth articulate, okay, this is the extreme. This is how awful it could get. And the reality is that it's going to be bad maybe for a day, maybe for a week, but then it's probably going to blow over. And I could just go on with my life. So let's keep my head down, control what I can control, and hope for the best. Related to that, I mentioned or alluded to this, that the news cycle changes very quickly in schools. And so, yes, in the moment, of course, we come alongside our youth and we demonstrate so much, care and compassion and validate their experience. Even if to us it feels like maybe a minor deal, it doesn't matter. It's all about how our child feels in that moment. So we validate their experience, but we also try to tell them that, look, the news is going to change. There's going to be somebody else who's talked about tomorrow or the next day or the next day. And maybe that doesn't help you in this moment, but I want you to hold on and just focus on your schoolwork and focus on the things that bring you joy, such as your sports and your clubs and your other activities. And we will get through this. And I'm going to help you. And I'm going to do all that I can to be an advocate for you and an ally and someone who brings you joy as best as I can. When we're growing up, we also think that everything we can control, like we just feel like we can control our popularity level. We just have to look a little bit better. We just have to dress a little bit nicer or have cooler clothes or be more physically attractive. Or say the right things and not say the wrong things. We feel like we can control all of that. But hopefully we also realize that maybe that just doesn't matter as much as we think it does. But again, when you're an adolescent, it feels that where we are in the social hierarchy is everything. So having another conversation about, okay, what really, really matters, now and especially in the future. Middle school is 3 years, high school is 4 years. And while you're in the thick of it, it feels like it's an eternity and it feels like it's going to last forever. But all of you on this call and me, I remember those years. And in retrospect, it's such a small chapter of our lives. So how can we try to, through our own stories, experiences, with the receptive ear of our teen when we have that, share with them about what actually matters and how short that period of life is and how it's so critical and instrumental for them to focus on other things rather than rising up the social ladder, because you can't control that. You just can't. So figure out what you should focus on. And it's what's in between the things that matter and the things you can control. Also continue to remind them that now is not forever. And it's hard, like I just mentioned, when you're in middle school or high school. But continuing to have sort of future-oriented goals, I think goes a long way, future-oriented discussions. And that could be planning the next trip that y'all will take together. Maybe like a rite of passage trip, which I know a lot of families do when their kid turns 15 or kid turns 16, or sorry, 13 or 16. Also, if you are a family of faith, we think about bat mitzvahs, bar mitzvah, we think about quinceañeras at 15. There's a lot of things that you can do. In the Sikh religion, we think about dastar bandi. So thinking about these future-oriented events and goals will, I think, help them not be so consumed with the daily dramas or the weekly dramas that they're exposed to. Plus, hopefully they're realizing that if they're caught up in those daily dramas, that's kind of miserable and it's going to continue to bring them down. And how can they instead get swept up in something bigger than themselves? What are they passionate about? Could be a social justice issue. Could be some sort of cause or talent they want to continue to cultivate. Let's throw ourselves into that and let's try to stiff arm or bracket all of the whispering or the chatter or the chirping that might be going on at our school about us, not about us. Doesn't really matter, big picture. I also want kids to continually be thinking about what fills their bucket. And here I'm thinking mostly about our emotional energy. And what I see is that there's a lot of youth who kind of glom on to a best friend or glom on to a small group of friends. And it makes me a little bit sad because they're getting a lot of their identity from their best friend or from that group, even though if they would take a huge step back and think things through, they would realize that it's very one directional. They're giving and giving and giving, and they're not getting. And that's not the mark of a friendship or even a healthy group that you're a part of. And so what we're seeing is that students who are able to succeed socially when they get older are students who don't glom onto this best friend and just hold so tightly and are desperate to always be in their good graces or in this group's good graces, but instead are able to fluidly move from group to group to group. Now, this, of course, is very relevant when you're thinking about all the group chats that youth are a part of, whether it's in Snapchat or whether it's via text. And then, of course, whatever the other social scene is happening when it comes to who they game with or who they otherwise interact with on their favorite platforms. And of course, offline too. But getting them to think through, like, who fills your bucket, I think will ideally, over time, help open their eyes to when they're, frankly, being exploited, being neglected, being taken advantage of in their friendship. And we want them to grow in self-confidence and in security to know their worth and know their value and not subject themselves to those types of relationships, again, offline or via their favorite apps and platforms. Anchors. I think a lot about anchors, and I think about, what are my anchors? What are these sort of, bedrock principles that I've built my life on? And am I working with my own kids about their bedrock principles? Because otherwise, if you and I are not intentional about this, they will be very susceptible to peer perceptions. They will fall apart when they're excluded from a group chat or when they're targeted with a sarcastic or even intentionally cruel message on a social media platform. I don't want them to fall apart. I want them to stay steady and stay stable. And so how do we do that? Well, one of the ways that I think it's possible to do this is by doing a values exercise with them. So if you go onto Google and just do a search for list of values, you might find a list of 20 values, 50 values, 100 values. That's all well and good. I prefer shorter lists over larger lists. And you would present them to your child and you would say, hey, I have a fun activity for you. Maybe you give them a bag of M&Ms too while they're working on this. And you say, I'd like you to circle, the 5 values that you want to be known for. where it's like, okay, Samir, what do you want to build your life upon? Maybe you're not there yet, but something about these values really resonates with you. Maybe they're already part and parcel of who you are, but you're proud of that and you want to continue to aspire towards these values. You want them to be who you're all about. The best version of yourself is the constellation of these 5 elements, so to speak. So they take the time while they're eating their M&Ms to identify 5 values, who they are, who they want to be. And then when they experience various sorts of social and relational strife, various forms of adversity, whatever that looks like, again, it's very easy to fall apart. It's very easy to feel unmoored and wonder, like, I don't even know what to do. I'm just lost in a fog. I'm lost in these clouds. Who am I? No, not who am I. We figured out who you were. And we love the fact that you've identified these 5 values, and we're going to keep coming back to them. This is your North Star. When you can't control what people are saying about you, posting about you, when you feel like life is falling apart, we keep coming back to these 5 truths. I personally, and this is a little bit silly, I always remember Frozen 2, and there's a song by Anna called The Next Right Thing. And when I struggle, and I struggle a lot, where it's like nothing good is happening in my life, even though I'm trying to, be a decent human being and care about others and just be noble and mature in all that I do. I remember that song, and it's like, I'm just going to keep doing the next right thing. And that is part and parcel of, again, my values. So I think this is very, very important. And I hope that you've identified what values in a very clear sort of experiential learning, project-based type of way, for example, this example or this activity, because then you can keep coming back to it. And you can figure out some sort of creative signage or ways to maybe immortalize this on a wall so that they always remember it. Again, we want our youth to have anchors. A couple other resources I want to share with you that I just love. So many of you know that we just keep coming back to our phone. I keep coming back to it. You keep coming back to it. I've gotten a lot better. And it's important to know that many of these apps are designed for engagement. They're designed for you to keep coming back, and they're designed for our children to keep coming back, to tap into our psychology, whether it's variable rewards. You post a selfie today, you get 375 likes, and then you post a selfie tomorrow and you get like 7 likes. And like, what in the world? What is the deal? But because you've been rewarded with so many likes the day before, you're just like, I'm going to keep posting, and hopefully the next time I'm going to get more social rewards of the likes and the comments and the positive reinforcement, the affirmation, the validation, which I sometimes desperately need as a teenager. But it's still very important to understand about like autoplay and infinite scroll, and I mentioned variable rewards. Some of these other sorts of, let's say, tricks built into the design to keep us coming back to the app, to lead to that dopamine hit, which we've heard all about. I feel like I have a good amount of self-control. I take the time to delete an app if I feel like it's controlling me and I don't have control over it. But are our youth willing to do that? Are they able to do that? Maybe this video will help them to just sort of think through some of those issues. Also, there's this great activity put out by Common Sense Education and the Center for Digital Thriving at Harvard, which allows them to sort of design an app. And they design an app in a few categories. For example, a social app, a fashion app, a health app, something like that. But then they first designed it for engagement, thinking about all the tricks they can employ to keep someone going back to it. But then they redesign it for well-being. And I think that's just a fun thought exercise for you to do, for me to do, for our kids to do as well. Again, it'll get them thinking and hopefully get them to understand that they don't want to be the tool. They shouldn't want to be the tool. They should use all of the apps as a tool, but they shouldn't be the tool. They shouldn't be the product. They shouldn't allow that. I also love this other resource, again, that the Center of Digital Thriving clued me into, which has to do with just these thinking traps that our youth get into. When I was growing up, and maybe you'll say, yes, Samir, this was my story as well, everything was very, very binary. It was like I was having a great day or my life was awful, and it was going to continue to be awful for forever. This is not healthy. There are so many shades of gray, and we need our youth to identify thinking traps, because especially as it relates to things that are posted online, it's easy to fall prey to these thinking traps, and that'll get you in a world of hurt, and it'll lead to dysfunctional sort of retaliatory type of behaviors. So here are some of the thinking traps. For example, my post didn't get that many likes, I'm a failure. So labeling what we do in such sort of pessimistic ways, I think that's very destructive to well-being and to mental health. All or nothing thinking, again, I struggled with that growing up, but it's not healthy. And we need our youth to understand that everyone is fighting a hard battle, despite how it seems that everything is amazing for them in their lives. No, everyone is to some degree posing and posturing and pretending that they have it all together. There was a great song about 20 years ago, man, time flies, called Breaking the Habit. Maybe you remember it by Linkin Park. And I think about that as it relates to, again, not making sure that the technology is not controlling us. We want to break the habit of always needing to distract ourselves, needing to sort of numb ourselves, needing to cope with the silence and the solitude through the use of our device. That's me, and that's our students, that's our youth as well. So here would be my tips. First off, you got to admit that we got a problem here, and I hope that your child does to some degree, if that's the case. And then you've heard this before, and I know that some of our kids use their phone as alarm clocks, but they could just get another alarm clock. There's other options. Leave it somewhere else. Leave it downstairs. Leave it in another room. And then when they set up limits, it's so easy for us to just sort of dismiss those reminders. You know, we sort of extend the duration, or we sort of change the start time or the end time at night. Cannot do that. We've got to have more self-control and more integrity, because otherwise I think it's a problem of integrity when you're always changing your screen time limits, which are set in place to help you have a better life. I know it's tricky. I don't want you to feel indicted. I don't want your kids to feel indicted, but that's the reality. Do not disturb. Many teenagers use do not disturb when they're working on some sort of school assignment. That should be done more often. And as I mentioned to you, I've deleted apps when I felt like I was checking them too often because I don't want to give up control. Notifications, maybe you need to have them, you as an adult need to have them on for work purposes, but non-essential. And I mean, I have every notification turned off except for texts. And then when it comes to texts, I usually have my phone on silent because I'll check them when I need to. The world did fine when it comes to emergencies before there was texting. And so you can choose what you want to do in your own household. Feel free to leave, your text notifications on. Feel free to keep your ringer on high at all times. That's totally fine. I just want us to think through, if there's an issue, if we can kind of ratchet the slider down a little bit there. Unfollow accounts that have a hold on you. That's a big deal, right? Because sometimes we follow an influencer, or our kids do, and it does not serve them. It makes them feel bad about themselves. But it keeps them coming back, which is the problem. Tech-free zones in your house, and the minimalistic phones, which I'll talk about, and then accountability. Accountability and rewards can help a lot, especially from loved ones. Ginny Urick, I'm a fan of her. She came up with this idea of 1,000 hours outside every year. You might be thinking, 1,000 hours outside? That's insane. How is anyone going to be able to accomplish that? But maybe you can reach 1,000 hours. It doesn't matter. Maybe you only reach 150 hours in 2024. That's 150 hours that you spent outside that maybe you wouldn't have spent outside because you set a goal. So maybe set a goal. Who knows where it could lead to? And then, of course, that's my daughter, Maya. Take them out and have conversations with them about how they're doing. And then they'll start to more and more open up with you about offline stuff as well as online stuff. Another quick data point before I get into AI. So vicarious supervision. This boy on the laptop, I bet he's not looking at inappropriate things because his dad's on a couch there and maybe kind of looking over his shoulder sometimes, or at least has the potential to. But we want the boy to not look at inappropriate things, whether or not there's the parent in the room. How do we make that happen? We've got this term called vicarious supervision that my colleague, Dr. Justin Passion, came up with, which I really like. It's all about how our youth are constrained to behave ethically when we're not around. And so what we found is that of youth who say that parents know what they're doing online, well, when the kid says they know most of the time or always, there's much less sexting and there's much less cyberbullying that's occurring. So it does matter. It does matter that you know to some degree what they're doing online. Also, is there an adult in your life that you definitely wouldn't want to disappoint? And so if you have a strong bond with your child and they don't want to disappoint you, well, that definitely affects their choices online when it comes to cyberbullying and sexting, and probably a lot of other behaviors as well. So work on that. Okay, AI. AI, very briefly, we understand, has to do with technology that can mimic or perform tasks that human intelligence can typically do. generative AI, which is all the rage, has to do with technology that can be used to create content, whether it's text or videos or pictures or audio content or even code, a number of other forms of content. And they create that content after having analyzed gigantic corpuses or bodies of data. And so after analyzing that, they then are able to mimic and create other content that is similar to the data set that it analyzed. I'm not sure if any of you have messed around with these generative AI tools that have become all the rage. A study done last year found that 64% of parents and 67% of teens have used these technologies. And you see that they're using it for analytic, creative, and efficiency boosting tasks. What was shocking to me is that 37% of parents, more so than teens, 30% of teens, use it for emotional support. So maybe some of you have opened up Google Bard or ChatGPT or Bing AI and have just decided to ask a certain question. And to be honest, I'm just being very vulnerable here. I have typed into Google, what do I do when nothing is working? I don't know what that says to you about me, but I have done that in the past and I think it's okay. So I guess it is logical that you or I might use an app like this, a technology like this, just to get some sort of good word, some sort of encouraging statement, because maybe we are uncomfortable sharing that vulnerable sentiment with a loved one or a friend. But also what's interesting is that at the bottom you see 2 out of 3 believe it will be a vital skill to have moving forward. So I asked my AI on Snapchat, because that's an app that I use, hey there, I'm speaking to a group today, and some of them may be a little nervous about the risks of Gen AI. Any advice for them or for me? And then my AI is like, yeah, that's an important talk. I think it's important to highlight the benefits and potential while acknowledging some of the concerns. So I thought that was brilliant advice. And by the way, that's something that I was going to do anyways. So way to go, chatbot, in knowing exactly how I'm thinking. And so let's do that. I made this morning because I was like, this will be fun. Let's go on to DALL-E, which you can do if you have a Microsoft account, which has a relationship with the OpenAI, which produces ChatGPT, but also DALL-E, which is the image creation aspect of generative AI that they have. And I just typed in a few prompts, such as, young girl, like my daughter, on a unicorn, in the rain, in a meadow. And this is what it came up with. And that's pretty impressive. But again, this is not completely original. This is based on billions of other images that it has analyzed and looked over. And then this is what it generated. But I've used AI to, for example, say, in my fridge, I have hot dogs, cheese, onions, potatoes. Can you help me make some sort of casserole? And very quickly, it will go ahead and spit out a recipe. I've also asked, is this a better investment than that a better investment? And I'm not asking you to use generative AI for your financial future, but I just thought it would be fun. You also might use it to get recommendations about a new piece of hardware, such as a laptop or a monitor or a new vehicle that you want to purchase, because it has analyzed so much text that has been written and posted online about new cars, about new laptops, about new monitors that you might want to buy. So those are just a few ideas. I trust that you played around with it, and I encourage you to play around with it. But there are some risky possibilities. I use the word possibilities very intentionally here because I want to be clear. I am not seeing a spate of harms and harassment unfolding with tons of news stories about it, but we still want them on our radar. I've written a piece about this, which I'll send to you in the chat window. Harassment and bullying is very possible because we can enlist chatbots. We can use the automation associated with generative AI to quickly create volumes of very harassing, very vicious content, and then deploy it, send it, share it on an account towards a specific individual, etc. Hate speech, of course, you can create a very graphic imagery that might be, racist or xenophobic in tone or in content, and of course that could be deployed. Deepfakes, we're familiar with those. How we can change what somebody is saying in a video as it appears, or in an audio clip. Catfishing, when people sort of disguise their identity and pretend that they're someone they're not. This could be aided and abetted through bots, which seem to be very genuine with how they're talking to us. Much like bots are being used for customer service. You call up some sort of company And what are we introduced to? We're introduced to some technology getting information from us through what seems to be pretty genuine, authentic questions, and then eventually routing us ideally to a point person who could help us specifically. But you can see how catfishing can unfold. Sextortion as well, being fooled. You think you're talking to a genuine individual, but they're just trying to extort you and get nudes from you. Doxing, where personal information is being shared about people, broadcasting it and rendering you vulnerable. And dogpiling and report brigading, that just involves multiple people, maybe even hundreds or thousands of people through the use of automation and AI sort of piling on you with hateful comments. And report brigading, it means filing false or disingenuous reports about you on a platform to get you banned or to get some sort of sanction coming down. Identity theft and scams, misinformation and disinformation can be vastly and widely deployed through this because it gets so easily created through these technologies. And then we worry about job security, the loss of critical thinking skills, for example, by college students. Are they really learning and internalizing information, or are they just sort of regurgitating what ChatGPT is telling them? And then the fear, the existential concern about AI surpassing humans, which I'm not worried about. 10 prevention tips, and we'll get close to wrapping up here. I just want you to mostly be involved, and that's actually my 10th tip, but I'll start with saying, try to use these tools together. Again, grab your favorite beverage or treat, sit down together and just try to create some new images with some fun prompts. Try to use, a site like 11 Labs to take your voice and have it generate another, a sort of synthetic voice saying something, but it's basically your voice. Prompts. We need to help our kids use the appropriate prompts. For example, when they're typing in specific keywords or terms, we don't want them to be racist. We don't want them to be hateful. We don't want them to be harassing. And thankfully, all of these tools, for the most part, they have parameters in place which constrain what is allowed as inputs, which is great. They'll say, for example, I'm sorry, we're not able to address that, or that topic is off limits for me, something like that. But we also don't want our students or our kids typing in information about themselves, which they should keep private, personal information. And we have to also realize that all of this data is all of these outputs, all of these creations from generative AI tools is sometimes based on data sets which have some sort of biases, some sort of leaning. And it might be related to political leanings, it might be related to capitalistic leanings, might be related to sort of first world leanings. There's a number of leanings that could possibly be relevant here, but they need to be aware of the biases. Hallucination simply means sometimes these tools come up with various pieces of creations which are passed along as fact, but they're not. They are wrong, they are false, they are inaccurate. And we call those hallucinations. And so that ties into, we want to make sure our youth are able to critically evaluate all of the output, because is the AI tool simply parroting back something that they've seen or read in a number of other documents, but again, could be patently false. Unethical use, so again, maliciously using these tools to target others, but then also non-maliciously using it. And I'm talking about plagiarism, cheating, etc. You can ask any of these tools to provide citations, and hopefully your students, when they're using these tools to outline or brainstorm or to figure out how they want to form a research paper, also are providing those citations and sources. And again, ask the tool to provide them, and it will, and disclose how you're using it to your school or to their work. Have a healthy skepticism in terms of who they're talking to, because that's important, right? You could be fooled, and you don't want to be the fool, because it could be these bots. And then oftentimes you and I, we're able to notice if something is amiss. Do not dismiss when you think something is amiss, because we're able to say to ourselves, whoa, that looks a little bit off, or something's weird about that person's face in this video when they're saying something, and so that could be a deep fake. Trust yourself, trust what you've learned over time interacting with humans, and as I mentioned, stay involved. So I'll make sure that I pass on my contact information, but we wanted to allow some time for Q&A. So at this moment, I will thank you for your attention. I will stop sharing my slides, and I'll turn it back over to Charlene.
Well, thank you, Dr. Samir Handuja. That was amazing. And that was a lot. You've given us a lot to think about. I see somebody just raised their hand. We're not set up to do that, but please do drop a question in the Q&A. Thank you for those of you who put in questions, really good ones. We're gonna get to as many of them as we can. So first of all, Dr. Handuja, you mentioned in the beginning some data around kids being bullied and cyberbullying. Parent asks here, how does that break down between girls and boys? Is there one group that's bullied more than others?
Sorry about that, I was on mute. What we find is that girls tend to be bullied in more relational ways. So for example, with group chats, that's something that definitely affects them when they are excluded or when they are targeted. Boys, and I know this is a bit stereotypical, but typically, since they do love games, they're often being targeted. They often deal with harassment within those platforms when they're playing their favorite games. Otherwise, though, many of these forms of harms are occurring equally across multiple genders.
Okay, thank you for that. Samir, is there really such a thing as safe social media use? I know you talk about that but new apps, new platforms coming all the time. For a parent, it can feel a little bit like whack-a-mole.
I think that's very fair. So I would say that any app, even if it's predominantly used positively, has the potential, if there's interactive features where you're connecting with other kids in some capacity, for there to be harm to take place, without a doubt. And even if some of these apps, which have been specifically created for youth, have all sorts of protections in place, we know that youth are very savvy. And so if there's some sort of blocks or filters, they will use different characters, they will use different slang, and the person on the receiving end knows what the sentiment is, knows that they are being harmed, knows that they are being targeted with vicious statements.
So you mentioned blocks and filters. Parents always say to us, is there some kind of software we should be using? Should we be blocking our kids? I'm not a big believer in it, but some people are, some parents are. How do you feel? And do you think that advice changes by the age of the child?
Great question. In my March presentation last year, we did cover a bunch of software solutions, and I do know that remains a hot topic, so I'm happy to cover it again. I continue to really like to recommend a product called Circle, which is put out by a company called Aura, A-U-R-A. If you just go to meetcircle.com, there's an evaluation version. You can check it out, and it does a really good job at helping you sort of toggle on and off apps and games and set time limits, get granular reports. Also, maybe you allow your certain iPhones and not allow certain iPads, certain laptops, not allow certain desktops, whatever you want to do, different time limits for different ages in your household, tons of customization. So meetcircle.com and then bark.us. I also like Bark just because they use AI to be able to explore the contents of messages that your child might be receiving, and then give you a little bits of notifications or flags, something that might be concerning. Now, with that, many times we have to understand that youth banter in a specific way where it's a little bit too colorful for your and my sort of desires, and it's not harassment, it's just how they talk. So you'll have to figure out the right sensitivity that you want to set for your notifications. And then the last thing I'll say, by the way, both of those have evaluation versions. The last thing I'll say is that when it comes to screen time, or what I think it's called digital well-being on Android devices, I would mess around with those, not mess around, I would play around with those. I would experiment with those, because you can, again, control app usage, you can control time usage in there. The only thing is that are our children able to very quickly circumvent those?
All right, so here's a good question, Samir. I'm sure you get this one all the time. What age should we introduce kids to social media such as Snapchat?
So ideally, I want them to show me with just texting and FaceTime and video chats, some of those basic technologies, that they're responsible. I want them to also be showing me that they're able to take care of all their chores and all of their schoolwork and just demonstrate maturity over and above. And at that point, then I'm going to say, all right, I'm able to give you access to an app. And you might disagree with me, but I personally would start with Snapchat, because number one, you're not competing for, it's not a popularity contest, so to speak, where you're competing for likes, and everyone can't put tons of comments on your latest picture, all that sort of stuff. It's basically a messaging app. I like that. Plus, there's no hashtags on Snapchat, and sometimes on Instagram and other platforms, when you follow hashtags, you can get into some uncomfortable, inappropriate rabbit holes, which I just don't want my kids to sort of click through down into. Snapchat is primarily a messaging app. And yes, again, there are concerns. Your friends, quote unquote, could turn on you. They could exclude you from a group chat. But still, I would start with that app. And then if they're showing me that I'm able to follow them, I'm able to message them, they're abiding by my rules, they're demonstrating trust, I might later on give them more access to a different app.
Okay,
In
but
terms of age, because I know that's the question,
yeah,
really, you just have to size up where they are developmentally. I don't want to say necessarily 13, because what if that 13-year-old is more immature than an 11-year-old? You just never really know.
that's right. And I think also it has to do with what you need as a parent. To be honest, I was a single mom when technology was coming in. I needed to be able to find my kids. So we get that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a quick follow-up, we see, because I work with an organization where I'm shepherding elementary schoolers on the weekends. And so it is remarkable that many of these elementary schoolers have Apple Watches. And why is that? It's because the parents are thinking to themselves, I want to get a hold of them. I want them to get a hold of me. And I don't want them to lose their phone. Their watch is tethered to their wrist. They're not going to lose that. And so it's a great way to just sort of stay in touch with them.
That makes sense. I can't lose it. I hadn't thought of it that way. All right. Well, Samir, given the fact that yesterday the Senate hearings were so in the news, I would be remiss in not asking you, do you think it's going to take legislation for some of these big companies like Facebook, like Instagram, like TikTok to make themselves safer for our kids?
I have been in this field for a long time, and I have worked with a number of these platforms when it comes to specific individuals in trust and safety who have great hearts and want to do great things. I also feel that maybe at the top of these companies, they have other priorities that sometimes take precedent. And so over the last few years, we have seen much more accountability, which I think has forced the issue. And I think that's a good thing. I think that maybe if we weren't having these congressional hearings and all of this attention after the whistleblowers, et cetera, then maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't be making as much progress as I think that we are making, that we are going to make in the next year or two. We saw in the testimonials that many of the CEO representatives are committing to lots of resources towards this topic. Maybe that wouldn't happen if they weren't called to the mat, so to speak. So yeah. I think that legislation matters. I'm going to post here a link about what I believe are the most essential elements of legislation, because, you think about California, we think about COSA, we think about some of these other pieces of legislation, and there's very important parts of that. And there's other parts where some other people, including me, are wondering, is this really enforceable? So I want to get to a point where it's like, okay, we're passing laws that are pretty much going to work based on the science, based on what we're seeing in the research. And so check out that link that I just posted, and I'm happy to, again, dialogue with anyone, because it is a topic of contention, and all of us, again, we have great intentions behind what we're trying to do. We just want to make sure that it works and it doesn't sort of get left in the dust.
Absolutely. So again, speaking of working, here's a question about family dynamics again. The writer asks, does it help to have electronics in the home in public spaces, whether or not an adult is present? Does that help build accountability for kids?
I don't really think so at this point. 20 years ago, we always wanted the only computer in the house in a family room, so that we could look over the shoulder of our teenager when they were on AOL Instant Messenger or whatever, ICQ or IRC or whatever they were using back then. But in this day and age, what I would rather have is for them to, over time, have developed a moral compass where they just don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to disappoint you. They have a code which they're trying to abide by, even if you and I and them, we fall short. And so then they will ideally be doing the right things, whether they're in your eyesight or whether they're in the privacy of their bedroom.
All right.
In your line of sight. Yeah.
And in terms of getting to be friends with your child on these apps, remember Devorah Heitner, our friend years ago, saying, ask once, let your kid accept you, and then never show up again. Do we still believe that, or do you think kids really deserve their own privacy online?
I think it's useful to be a friend or a follower, simply so that you have a basic set of familiarity or basic amount of familiarity with the app, so that if there is ever some sort of issue, you can chat with them relatively intelligently about how it works, or the blocks, or the reporting functionality, the strategies that can be employed within the app to protect them. So that's what I think the utility is. You and I, as parents, we don't have time to be checking in every single day with what our kid is posting. Plus, I don't want to do that. I want to give them some space to grow as an individual.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. So Dr. Handuja, we have just a minute or so left together. I want to give you just some time for some last words. You're a parent, we are parents. We care about the safety of our kids. What is the thing that you really want parents to walk away with tonight?
I don't want them to feel alone. I think that when I speak to my neighbors who are not in this field, they're so thankful that they have Samir, that they can just kind of walk over or text and say, I'm dealing with this. And that just happened last week. I was able to help a neighbor. And I say that because I love to come through for people, and I want each of you to know that I'm happy to, work with you in terms of if you're ever in some sort of pickle, your child, your teenager, we want to assist them, because what they tell me, the kids, they say, look, I just want the problem to go away.
Mhm.
So how can we help them with that? We can work with the platforms, we can encourage them, we can remind them of what's important down the road when it comes to their future and what they can control. And so just continue to endeavor towards those ends as you build that healthy communication line with them. And I think that's what matters. I don't want you to get overwhelmed with, I have to learn this app, and now I have to buy Apple Vision Pro because I need to learn about how that's going to be used. I mean, feel free. I think it's going to be really cool technology. But my point is that don't get overwhelmed. Just realize that as you continue to raise a decent human being, focus on all the things that make up a decent human being, such as thoughtfulness, compassion, moral compass, empathy, resilience. And I think that it will translate into fruit offline and online.
Well, thank you, Dr. Handuja. We love your values-centered perspective, and that's why we keep asking you back. It's a beautiful thing. And parents, I don't know about you, but I just feel a lot more secure about being able to handle whatever our kids throw at us. Look at that. See, I love those floating emojis. People really appreciate feeling they're not alone. And again, Samir answers his email. He's serious. If you get something where you feel really stuck or your kid's really stuck, email him. If he said that we can, we will. So Dr. Samir Handuja, again, thank you so much for your talk tonight and your expertise and your kindness. We really appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good night. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Samir.